Of course, the universe knew exactly when to humiliate me. I muttered under my breath, glaring at the email blinking ominously in my inbox. If cosmic irony had a face, it would be grinning at me from behind the screen. The client, a young editor from New York, had just sent me another cryptic message insisting that the story I was writing, his commissioned novel about a heartbroken musician falling in love with a stubborn painter, was somehow reflecting my own secret life. Secret life. The closest thing to a scandal I had was binge-watching rom-coms in my underwear, occasionally crying at particularly cruel plot twists. And yet here I was, a freelance writer in Chicago, accused of writing my autobiography by someone I hadn't even met in person. I rubbed my eyes and leaned back on my worn-out couch, feeling the spring of the cushion's protest under my weight. Outside, the city pulsed with the hum of traffic. Taxis honking, pedestrians arguing over crosswalks. Inside, the dim light of my floor lamp cast shadows that danced across piles of notebooks, half-empty coffee cups, and stray pens. Somewhere in the mix, I could feel the quiet thrum of loneliness that always seemed to accompany late-night writing sessions. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed again. Another message from him. Have you ever considered that you're writing yourself into the story? I can't shake the feeling that the protagonist's heart beats like yours. I groaned and pinched the bridge of my nose. Was this professional critique or psychological torment? Or maybe, the beginning of something much more complicated. A knock on the door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart jumped, a ridiculous little pulse of panic and curiosity. Standing there was a courier holding a small package, which I signed for with fumbling fingers. When I opened it, I found a single, leather-bound notebook and a note. For inspiration. Don't tell anyone I sent it. And just like that, my perfectly ordinary Tuesday took a sharp turn into the absurd. I sank back into the couch, notebook on my lap, and began to leaf through it. The pages were filled with sketches, half-written sentences, and what seemed like fragments of letters. But there, scrawled in my own handwriting, were lines I didn't recognize writing themselves across the page. He leaned too close, and I almost forgot to breathe. I wanted him, not in theory or imagination, but entirely, impossibly, in this very moment. I blinked. This was me. Or was it what I wanted to be? A sudden knock at my window made me jump again. I cautiously peeked through the blinds. There, on the fire escape, stood a young man with messy blonde hair, mischievous green eyes, and a smile that seemed capable of both destruction and salvation. He held a steaming cup of coffee, and my apartment smelled faintly of vanilla and cinnamon before he even stepped inside. Delivery for the tortured writer, he asked, voice smooth and teasing, as if he had rehearsed this line 100 times. I didn't order, I began, but he had already stepped in, brushing past me with a confidence that made my pulse trip over itself. Don't worry, I'm not here to judge your messy apartment, or your messy life, just here to make it more interesting. And just like that, my heart was no longer alone in its dull apartment rhythms. The stranger didn't introduce himself properly, just smiled like he owned the moment, plopped onto the couch beside me. I tried to shift, to give him space, but there was none to give. He leaned closer than necessary, and I could smell his faint, sweet cologne, like warm summer evenings and mischief. You're the writer, right? He asked, eyes scanning my scattered notes. All these scribbles, they're about him, aren't they? Who? I asked, voice catching, though I knew exactly who he meant. You know, he said, grinning. The guy you secretly want to punch and kiss in equal measure. The one who keeps you awake at night writing ridiculous fan letters in your head. I laughed nervously, feeling the heat creep up my neck. That's, maybe. He leaned even closer, and I felt my breath hitch. Because it's funny, he said softly, how your words don't just describe the story. They describe you. And me. I wanted to protest, to shove him away, to retreat into my fortress of words. But the warmth of his hand brushing mine on the notebook made me pause. Maybe this was the universe's idea of a joke or a challenge. What's your name? I finally managed to ask, my voice lower than intended. He smirked, eyes glinting with a secret I wanted to know. Call me Sam. And you? I hesitated, then realized that names were the smallest concern right now. Evan. Evan. He repeated, savoring the sound, leaning back just enough to watch my reaction. Funny. I think this is going to be more interesting than I expected. And just like that, the quiet hum of my apartment was replaced by a tension that buzzed in the air. Thick and electric. We sat there in silence for a moment. Pages of the mysterious notebook between us. Breaths sinking without meaning to. My fingers brushed his again. Intentionally this time. And I felt a shiver run through me, a mix of fear, curiosity, and something dangerously sweet. I knew, in that precise moment, that this stormy story, our story was no longer just ink on paper. It had a heartbeat, and it was beating faster with every glance, every accidental brush, every unspoken word. Outside, the Chicago skyline glimmered like scattered diamonds. Inside, two hearts were about to write a narrative neither of us could fully control. A love story that began with teasing smirks, late-night scribbles, and an unintentional confession tucked between lines of fiction. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized the client might be right. Somehow, the story I thought I was writing for him was writing itself from my own life, in ways I was only beginning to understand. I couldn't stop staring at him. Sam had this ridiculous ability to make a mess of my thoughts without even trying. Every time his green eyes caught mine, my chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt in years. It was maddening and exhilarating all at once. I wanted to tell him to leave, to retreat back into my carefully constructed bubble of solitude. But my body betrayed me with every subtle brush of his hand on mine. So, Sam began, tilting his head, his fingers tracing the edge of the notebook. You're telling me these scribbles. This is your life talking. I swallowed hard. It's complicated. This isn't exactly normal. He laughed softly, a sound that felt like it belonged in my apartment, not out there in the chaotic city streets. Since when has normal ever mattered? I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. The truth was, normal was boring, predictable, safe. And Evan, sorry, I was anything but safe. Sam leaned closer, his shoulder brushing mine, and I felt the world shrink down to just the two of us. You know, he murmured, voice low enough that it sent shivers down my spine. You don't have to explain. I get it. Maybe better than you think. The words hit me harder than I expected. Better than I think. I wasn't sure if he meant the notebook, the story, or me. My pulse quickened. You don't? I asked, barely daring to breathe. He shrugged, but the slight smirk tugging at his lips betrayed him. I've been around writers before. People who pour their soul into paper like it's oxygen. But most of them are too scared to admit what they really want. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Me. Scared. Maybe. Scared of him. Certainly. scared of what it would mean if I let him see everything, the messy, vulnerable parts of me. And yet, a small, reckless part of meth part that had been craving connection for months wanted to dive right in. I'm not usually like this, I admitted, gesturing vaguely at the notebook, the apartment, maybe even him. Like what? He asked, leaning back slightly but keeping his gaze fixed on me. Like letting someone in. Like letting someone see me. Sam's expression softened, a flicker of something warm passing through his eyes. Good thing I'm not most people. I wanted to laugh, but instead my throat caught on a lump of words I couldn't quite get out. He was dangerous in the most delicious way, teasing, bold, and entirely unafraid to cross lines I had built years ago. We fell into a strange, unspoken rhythm. I read the lines in the notebook aloud, hesitant at first, and Sam listened, occasionally murmuring comments or brushing a finger across the page as if he could pull the story out and into real life. Each word, each sentence, felt like a confession neither of us was ready to name. You really are writing yourself, he said after a particularly quiet moment, voice almost reverent. It's all here. The longing, the hesitation, he paused, smirk returning. Tiny explosions of desire when I leaned too close. I froze. His words were a mirror reflecting back everything I hadn't admitted. My pulse raced, my fingers trembling slightly on the page. You're reading too much into it, I said, though my voice was thin, unsure. Or maybe you're writing too much into it, he countered, leaning just a fraction closer. The scent of his cologne wrapped around me, making my head spin. Either way, I like it. The tension between us was electric, charged with words unspoken, glances lingering too long, touches that meant more than either of us admitted. I wanted to pull back, to claim control, but the warmth of his presence was impossible to resist. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. The city outside faded into a blur of lights and distant sirens. Our conversation drifted from the notebook to triviality as favorite coffees, childhood memories, guilty pleasures, but always returned to the unsaid, to that pull between us that neither could ignore. At one point, Sam reached over to adjust a page in the notebook, and our hands brushed. It was fleeting, a small contact that should have been inconsequential. But it wasn't. My heart lurched, and I felt heat pool in my stomach. He noticed, of course, and smirked. You're blushing, he teased softly. I'm not, I began, but my voice cracked. Yes, you are, he interrupted, leaning just enough to lower his face near mine. It's cute. Don't fight it. I wanted to protest, to put distance between us, but my limbs refused. Instead, I found myself leaning just a little closer, drawn by an invisible force I didn't fully understand. The notebook lay forgotten between us as the room seemed to shrink around our shared warmth. I could feel every subtle movement, the brush of his knee against mine, the faint pressure of his shoulder, the heat radiating from his chest. The teasing spark in his eyes softened, replaced by something more intimate, more vulnerable. You're going to ruin me, you know, I whispered, half to myself. I plan to, he replied, voice low and intimate, brushing his hand over mine once more. But don't worry. I think you'll like it. My pulse thundered in my ears. I had no idea if I was ready for this, ready for someone who could see me, challenge me, make me feel everything I had buried under words and fiction. And yet, every instinct screamed that I wanted this, wanted him. The night grew deeper, and the city outside quieted. leaving only the soft hum of the radiator and our shared breathing. Sam shifted closer, his hand brushing mine again, a subtle claim that sent shivers through me. "I've got an idea," he said suddenly, breaking the silence with a mischievous grin. "Let's test if you really are writing yourself. Read me another line, one you haven't told anyone else, and maybe I'll tell you what I think." My fingers hovered over the page. This was dangerous, reckless, and yet the pull was irresistible. I began to read, voice barely above a whisper. He smiles in ways that make my heart trip, and I find myself wanting to lean in, to steal that smile for myself. Every brush of his hand feels like a confession, every glance like a promise. Sam's eyes darkened slightly, his smirk replaced by something softer, more deliberate. "You're doing it again," he murmured, voice thick. "You're writing me into your story, and I don't mind one bit." Heat surged through me. I wanted to retreat, to reclaim control, but my body betrayed me, inching closer without conscious thought. "Sam," I breathed, my name sounding foreign, intimate, fragile on my lips. He tilted his head, letting the word hang in the air, savoring it. Then, in a move that felt both shocking and inevitable, he leaned in. Our foreheads touched first, a tentative connection, a silent acknowledgement of the growing tension. My breath caught. "You don't have to pretend anymore," he whispered. "Not with me." And in that moment, everything shifted. The walls I had built around myself, the careful distance, the self-imposed solitude, they all crumbled under the weight of his presence. I wanted this, wanted him, all of him, all at once. Our lips met hesitant, testing, exploring. It was soft, almost shy, and yet charged with months of longing, frustration, and unspoken desire. My hands found his shoulders, clutching gently as if afraid he might disappear. His hands traced the curve of my jaw, the line of my neck, grounding me in the reality of this impossible, intoxicating moment. Time seemed irrelevant. The city, the apartment, the world outside, all of it melted away until there was only us. Only the shared warmth and the dizzying, electrifying closeness. When we finally parted, breathing heavily, our foreheads still pressed together, Sam grinned mischievous, triumphant, intimate. "You're writing yourself into this story," he said softly, "and I don't mind being part of it." I wanted to argue, to say it wasn't like that, but my lips curved into a smile before words could escape. Maybe he was right. Maybe, just maybe, the universe had finally handed me something worth living for. And somehow, in the glow of that quiet apartment, with the city lights sparkling outside, I realized that this was only the beginning. Morning came slowly, like it always did when life refused to offer easy solutions. Sunlight filtered through my blinds, highlighting the chaos of my apartment, the scattered notebooks, empty coffee cups, and the lingering scent of Sam's cologne that stubbornly clung to my clothes. I groaned, realizing that last night's closeness had left me in a liminal space between exhilaration and panic. I should have been rational. I should have told him to leave, to respect boundaries. But rationality had taken a back seat ever since Sam had arrived. And now, staring at the empty couch where he had fallen asleep, sprawled like he belonged here, I realized how messy things were about to get. The notebook lay open between us, its pages whispering secrets I had barely begun to understand. I ran my fingers over the lines I had read to him, feeling the heat of last night's confessions linger. My phone buzzed, another message from my client. The one who thought my fiction mirrored my life. You're dangerously close to reality. Are you sure you want to keep writing this story? I laughed bitterly. Dangerous. Reality. If only he knew. Reality had arrived last night. Curling up on my couch with a mischievous grin and a name that refused to leave my lips. Sam. By noon, Sam was awake, stretching languidly like a cat in the sun, completely oblivious to the turmoil in my mind. "Morning," he said, voice husky, eyes sparkling with amusement. "You're awake. That's a surprise." "I've been awake for hours," I muttered, trying to regain some semblance of control. "Writing, thinking, regretting letting you in." He tilted his head, smirk returning. "Regret? Already? We just got started." I swallowed hard. He was right. Last night wasn't just a single moment, it was a spark. And sparks, I knew, could turn into flames. Flames that were uncontrollable, consuming, and terrifying. We fell into an uneasy rhythm for the rest of the day. Sam wandered through my apartment, touching books, examining sketches, asking pointed questions that left me flustered. Every glance, every brush of his fingers against mine, reminded me that he wasn't just a guest, was a catalyst, challenging every carefully constructed boundary I had. "You're hiding something," he said casually, settling beside me on the couch. His knee brushed mine, deliberate, and I felt my pulse quicken. "I'm not," I said quickly, though my voice betrayed me. He grinned knowingly. "Sure. Just like the protagonist in your notebook isn't hiding anything." I felt my cheeks burn. How did he always see through me? Maybe I just don't trust easily, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Good thing I'm persistent," he said, leaning closer, "and maybe a little charming." That combination, persistence and charm, was lethal. I wanted to resist, to retreat into my fortress of solitude. But the truth was, I didn't want to. Not completely. There was something magnetic about Sam. Something that pulled me in despite every warning bell blaring in my head. But reality, as always, was relentless. My clients' messages piled up, demanding updates, insisting on plot twists, reminding me of deadlines. And as much as I wanted to lose myself in Sam, I couldn't ignore the outside world. I began, hesitating. Focus on work. Sam raised an eyebrow, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Focus on writing for someone else. That's boring. We have a story here, Evan. Ours. Don't you want to see where it goes?" The audacity of him, claiming ownership of my feelings, my story, my life. And yet, the warmth spreading through me told me that maybe I did. The next few days were a blur of stolen moments and silent tension. Sam lingered, always just close enough to make my chest ache, always leaving me questioning boundaries I thought I had solidly built. We walked through Chicago streets together, shared coffee at obscure cafes, and even argued over trivialities, arguments that somehow ended in laughter, sometimes dangerously close to more intimate touches. But as with all things too good to be simple, the complications arrived uninvited. I discovered an email from an old flame, someone who had left my life messy and incomplete years ago, suddenly resurfacing. Reading the words made my chest tighten, reminding me of past heartbreaks, of the emotional walls I had built to survive. And I realized Sam's presence, his charm, his relentless teasing, was cracking those walls faster than I could manage. I tried to push him away, subtly, gently, But every attempt was met with his knowing eyes. "You can't hide from me, Evan," he said one evening, voice low, brushing my hair back from my forehead. "I see the walls, and I see the cracks. Don't fight it." "I'm not," I began, but he leaned closer, and the word died on my lips. The air between us was charged, heavy with unspoken confessions and suppressed desire. That night, alone in my apartment except for the hum of the city outside, I realized that my life was no longer my own. Every glance, every brush of his hand, every teasing smirk was pulling me deeper into a story I wasn't sure I could navigate. And yet, the thought of retreating off, denying the undeniable connection, was unbearable. We reached a point where pretense was impossible. Sitting together in my living room, the notebook open but forgotten between us, Sam traced patterns on my hand with his fingers. The intimacy was casual, yet it made my heart stutter in ways I hadn't felt in years. "You know," he said softly, leaning closer, "we could just stop pretending. Stop pretending that this, whatever this is complicated or forbidden or impossible." I wanted to agree, to say yes, to let go. But fear gripped me, fear of vulnerability, of loss, of being seen too clearly. "Sam," I whispered. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine. "I'm not going anywhere," he said simply. "But you have to let me in. Fully." The simplicity of it, fully, completely made me tremble. And in that trembling, in the shared heat of our proximity, I realized something fundamental. I wanted him. Not cautiously, not with reservations, but entirely. The tension between us exploded one evening when a storm rolled over the city. Rain pelted the windows, lightning illuminating the room in fleeting bursts. Sam pulled me close, laughter dancing in his eyes as he whispered, "Perfect weather for confession, don't you think?" I didn't answer. My hands found his, and we clung to each other as if holding on could anchor us against the storm. And then, in a moment of reckless clarity, we kissed, not softly this time, but with the force of everything we had been holding back. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside me. Every heartbeat, every gasp, every whispered name tore down the last of my defenses. I realized, in the heat of that kiss, that I was utterly, irrevocably entangled with him. Morning came again, softer this time. Sunlight fell over our intertwined bodies, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the numb, solitary peace I had known, but a living, breathing, chaotic peace that came with love, with risk, with intimacy. Sam stirred beside me, brushing a strand of hair from my face, smiling that infuriating, charming smile. "Good morning," he murmured. "Morning," I replied, voice hoarse, eyes reflecting a mix of relief, desire, and awe. And as the city outside hummed with its usual chaos, I realized that my story, our story, was no longer fiction. It was real, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to live it fully. The days that followed were a tangle of emotions, delicate and dangerous all at once. Sam stayed longer than I expected, his presence no longer a novelty but a constant undercurrent in my life. It was intoxicating, frustrating, and terrifying all at once. Every glance, every lingering touch, every teasing remark tugged at something deep inside me, something I had spent years trying to ignore. I tried to focus on work. I really did. My clients' deadlines loomed. The novel's plot demanded attention. And yet my thoughts kept straying to Sam, his laugh echoing in my apartment, the brush of his hand against mine, The way his eyes seemed to look straight into my soul, it was impossible to concentrate. One evening, I was typing feverishly, trying to ignore the way my pulse spiked every time Sam came near. He leaned over my shoulder, reading the lines I had just written. "You're killing me with honesty," he murmured, voice low and teasing. "You make it sound effortless, but I can see the way you hold back." I froze, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Holding back?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. "Yes," he said, leaning closer, his shoulder brushing mine. "You're scared. Scared of losing control. Scared of letting someone in. Scared of me." I wanted to deny it, but his eyes were relentless, green and piercing, seeing everything I had tried to bury. "Maybe I am," I admitted quietly. "Maybe I don't know how to." He cut me off gently, pressing a finger to my lips. "Shoo, you don't have to explain. Just trust me." Trust. The word alone was heavy with meaning. I had been so careful, so guarded, and yet here was Sam, insisting that I let go, that I embrace the chaos I had been resisting. And slowly, against every instinct, I found myself doing just that. But life, as it often does, refuses to let happiness exist without testing it. The following week brought a surprise. My ex, someone I had tried to leave behind, reached out with an apology and promises of reconciliation. My heart stuttered at the thought, memories flashing like broken film reels. I had fought so hard to move forward, to trust someone new, and now this ghost from my past threatened to unravel everything. I avoided Sam that day, staying holed up in my apartment under the guise of work. But he found me anyway, standing at the doorway with that infuriating grin and a knowing look that cut through every excuse I had. "You're hiding," he said simply. "I'm not." I lied, too stubborn to admit the truth. "Evan," he sighed, stepping inside, his presence overwhelming. "You can't pretend with me. I can see right through it. Who is he?" My heart raced, and I felt the old fear rising. The fear of being hurt, of losing control, of letting someone in and watching them walk away. It's nothing," I muttered. "Nothing," Sam repeated, incredulous. "You look like you've been punched in the gut. Nothing doesn't make you avoid me for an entire day." I wanted to explain, to tell him I wasn't ready, that my past was messy, that I didn't know how to handle the feelings that had been building for weeks. But the words caught in my throat. And in that silence, he understood anyway. He reached out, gripping my hand gently. "Evan, listen. I don't care about him. Care about you. About now. About us. Don't let ghosts steal this from us." Tears pricked my eyes. The fear, the anxiety, the weight of past heartbreak, they all collided in that moment. And yet, in Sam's steady gaze, I found something I hadn't known in years. Safety. Not the kind that comes from isolation, but the kind that comes from trust, from shared vulnerability, from allowing yourself to be seen. I don't know if I can," I whispered, voice breaking. "You can," he said firmly, squeezing my hand. "And I'll be here, every step of the way." We sat there, hand in hand, letting the silence speak what words could not. The storm of emotions inside me slowly began to settle, replaced by a tentative, fragile hope. The next few days were an experiment in trust and intimacy. Sam stayed close, not just physically, but emotionally, supporting me as I navigated the residual fear and uncertainty. We walked through the city, shared long coffee shop conversations, and sometimes, simply sat together, letting the world rush past while we existed in our own small, perfect bubble. One night, under the dim glow of a street lamp, we found ourselves alone on the empty streets, rain lightly falling around us. Sam pulled me close, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You're mine," he murmured, voice low and intimate. Not in a possessive way, but in a way that means I choose you. Every day. My chest tightened. The words were simple, yet carried the weight of a promise. Commitment. A future I had dared to hope for but never believed possible. I leaned into him, resting my head against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I choose you too," I whispered, finally allowing myself to admit the truth. The city around us blurred into insignificance. The rain, the streetlights, the distant sounds, they all faded, leaving only us. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Love was not about perfection, or control, or certainty. It was about choosing, again and again, to trust, to give, to be vulnerable. Back in my apartment, we celebrated our newfound closeness in quiet, tender ways. A brush of hands across a notebook, a whispered confession in the dark, a kiss that lingered longer than necessary. It was intimacy in its purest form, a connection that transcended words and deadlines and past heartbreaks. And yet, even in this serenity, there was growth. I began to see my writing differently, no longer just a tool for solitude or self-reflection, but a way to capture the beauty, the pain, and the complexity of human connection. Sam became both muse and companion, his presence inspiring lines that flowed with emotion and honesty I had never dared to put on paper before. Days turned into weeks. Our relationship deepened, built on trust, laughter, and shared vulnerability. The city, once overwhelming and isolating, became a backdrop to our small Universia universe filled with coffee, late-night conversations, rainy walks, and whispered secrets. And finally, one quiet evening, as the sun set over the skyline, painting the apartment in hues of gold and pink, Sam turned to me, eyes serious but soft. "Evan," he said, voice trembling slightly, "I don't want this to be temporary. I don't want us to be just a fleeting story. I want all of it. Every chapter, every word, every messy, beautiful part." I felt tears prick my eyes again, but this time they were tears of joy, relief, and certainty. "I want that too," I whispered, pulling him into an embrace that promised permanence, devotion, and love. In that embrace, the past faded, the fears dissolved, and the city outside continued its chaotic symphony. But inside, in our apartment, with our notebook open and our hearts intertwined, we found something timeless, something worth holding on to, something real. The story I had been writing for someone else had become our story. A story of vulnerability, passion, and trust. A story where fear met courage, and hesitation met intimacy. A story where two broken hearts found completion in each other. And as Sam kissed my forehead, smiling that infuriating, perfect smile, I realized that this was only the beginning. Not of a story on paper, but of a life together, messy, imperfect, beautiful, and entirely ours. The days after our confession settled into a comforting rhythm. Chicago's skyline, usually jagged and imposing, now felt like a warm backdrop to our shared life. Morning coffees became rituals. Our notebooks cluttered the apartment more than ever. And every day Sam found a way to make me laugh, groan, or blush with a single glance or mischievous remark. Work no longer felt like a burden. Writing for my client continued, but the stories flowed differently, imbued with intimacy, vulnerability, and the quiet joy of being truly seen. Sam was my muse, but more than that, he was my anchor, reminding me that life didn't have to be solitary or cautious. One evening, we walked along the Chicago River. The city lights reflected in the water like scattered jewels. Rain had recently passed, leaving the streets glistening, and a soft breeze carried the scent of wet pavement and spring blooms. Sam held my hand casually, but the intimacy in that simple touch was profound, grounding me in ways words never could. "Do you ever think about the future?" he asked, voice low, almost hesitant. I glanced at him, surprised. It was rare for Sam to show uncertainty, to let his vulnerability peek through the playful veneer he usually wore. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Mostly I hope it's calmer than my past." He squeezed my hand gently. "I don't promise calm, but I promise this I'll be here. For the storms and the quiet. For every chapter we haven't written yet." His words wrapped around me like a warm embrace. I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling the rise and fall of his chest, the subtle pulse that matched my own. "Then let's write it together," I whispered. "Every messy, beautiful part." Weeks turned into months. Our relationship deepened in ways that were both exhilarating and grounding. We learned each other's habits, quirks, and fears. Sam's laughter became my favorite sound, and his touch, whether teasing or tender, became my constant reassurance. We argued occasionally, of course over trivial things, over stubborn pride, but every disagreement ended with compromise, empathy, and usually a lingering kiss that reminded us why we chose each other. One Sunday, we decided to tackle a project together, decorating the apartment. It was chaotic, fun, and full of laughter. Paint smudges adorned our hands and cheeks, and our attempts to hang pictures perfectly resulted in crooked frames and playful arguments. At one point, Sam tripped over a stray notebook and fell onto me, laughter spilling from both of us as we toppled onto the couch in a tangled heap. "See," he said, grinning, "this is what life with me is like. Messy, unpredictable, and slightly dangerous." "I can handle messy," I replied, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Especially if it comes with you." The apartment became our sanctuary, our shared life, built from small moments, late-night coffees, scribbled notes. Stolen kisses was more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. And yet, even in the quiet moments, the city outside continued its hum, a reminder that life went on, but that we had carved a world of our own within it. Then came the night that cemented everything. We were curled up on the couch, the notebook open but forgotten, the city lights painting the walls in soft golds and pinks. Sam leaned over, brushing his lips against my temple, whispering, "I love you, Evan." My breath caught. The words, simple and profound, resonated in every fiber of me. "I love you too, Sam," I murmured, voice trembling with sincerity. "More than I've ever dared to love anyone." He smiled, that perfect, mischievous grin softened by sincerity, and kissed me deeply. The kiss carried months of longing, uncertainty, fear, and finally, release. It was a culmination of everything we had endured, the walls we had broken, the vulnerability we had embraced, the trust we had cultivated. "I want forever," he whispered against my lips. "Forever," I echoed. And so we built a tour forever. Not flawless, Not without challenges, but real, messy, beautiful, and entirely ours. We faced life together, celebrated its victories, weathered its storms, and always returned to the simple truth that we had each other. Our love deepened in ordinary moments as much as in extraordinary ones. Cooking together became a dance of playful competition. Morning coffees a quiet ritual of comfort. And late-night writing sessions a shared intimacy where our fingers brushed over pages, laughing at mistakes, marveling at ideas, and occasionally stealing kisses between sentences. The notebook, once a tool for fiction, became a chronicle of our lives. Our entries were filled not just with words, but with sketches, pressed flowers, and tiny mementos from our days together. Each page told a story not of perfect love, but of authentic, human connection. And in it, I saw not only our past but the limitless potential of our future. Months later, Sam and I took a spontaneous trip outside the city. We wandered through quiet towns, walked along lockshores, and explored art galleries, but always returned to one another. One evening, sitting by a campfire under a sky littered with stars, Sam took my hand, his eyes reflecting the flames. "Evan," he said, voice serious, "do you realize how far we've come?" I smiled, squeezing his hand. "Every step," I replied, "even the scary, uncertain ones. They brought me here. To you." He leaned closer, forehead resting against mine, and whispered, "I wouldn't change a thing, and I want to keep going. With you. Always." Always, I agreed, the word resonating like a promise, a vow, a heartbeat shared between us. Back in Chicago, life continued its usual chaos, but our apartment, our home, remained a sanctuary. The city lights glimmered outside. The streets buzzed with activity. But inside, we cultivated a world defined by laughter, touch, words, and unwavering affection. Even my writing transformed. Where once I chronicled fictional characters, now my stories carried the essence of user intimacy, our challenges, our love. I found myself writing not just for clients, but for us, for our memories, for the unspoken promise that no matter what came, we would face it together. One rainy evening, Sam and I curled up under a blanket, the notebook open between us, though now it was filled with notes, sketches, and confessions of love rather than distant stories. I traced a line in his hand, feeling the warmth, the pulse, the undeniable reality of him. "You've changed my life," I said softly. He chuckled, brushing a kiss over my knuckles. "And you've changed mine. You've made me brave, Evan. Brave enough to trust. Brave enough to love completely." I smiled, heart full. "Then let's keep being brave. Together." And we did. Our love was not flawless. There were moments of doubt, moments of fear, but they were outweighed by laughter, touch, trust, and shared dreams. We faced life as partners, companions, and confidants. Each day brought new adventures, new challenges, and new joys, but always together. Years later, looking back on that first day Sam stepped into my apartment, I realized that everything, the awkward introductions, the teasing glances, the stolen kisses, the storms, had led us here, to a love that was real, enduring, and entirely ours. And in the quiet moments, when the city outside hummed and our apartment glowed with the soft light of home, I would glance at Sam, see his smile, feel his hand in mine, and know that this was the story I had always been waiting to write. Not a story for a client, not a story in a notebook, but a story of life, of love, of two hearts that had found each other in the chaos and chosen to stay. We had written it together. Every word, every chapter, every messy, beautiful moment. And it was perfect. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.